In December 1964, a small club opened at number 16 Gerrard Street, in the part of Soho that would later become the heart of London's Chinatown. The owner called it the Hideaway. He had bought a tired old room that traded under the name Bonsoir, spent money refurbishing it, and reopened it for the Christmas trade with a new sign over the door. On opening night, a table had been booked for two of the most talked about men in London. The table stayed empty. The men did not come. To anyone passing on the pavement, an empty table is nothing. A no-show, bad manners maybe. But the two men who failed to arrive were Ronnie and Reggie Kray, and in their world, an absence carried weight. A book table left cold on a first night told the room that something had gone wrong between the owner and the twins. It told the staff. It told the regulars who already knew which doors in Soho earned money and which men decided who earned it. Before a single threat was spoken aloud, the message had already moved down the street. The man who took the booking and watched the chair stay empty was Hew Cargill McCowan. Within 4 months, his club would be sold over his head, renamed El Morocco, and turned into a stage for Kray photographs that still circulate 60 years later. McCowan went to the police. The twins were arrested, remanded, tried twice, and walked free. Then the room he had refurbished became theirs. That is the shape of the story. A businessman said no to the Kray firm, used the law, and lost the club anyway. The version told 1,000 times on screen tends to stop there, dressed up with celebrity faces and sharp suits. The harder story sits underneath the photographs, in the bank accounts, the front companies, the bounced checks, and the fixed juries. This is a story worth telling. So before we get to the party at El Morocco, we have to look at what the Krays were really building, who was building it for them, and why a single nightclub owner in Gerrard Street ended up at the center of a case the police could not win. Before we go any further, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps us keep digging into stories like this one and bringing you proper, researched British true crime stories and documentaries. Drop a comment with what you make of it. And for those of you already subscribed, welcome back. Let's start with the man at the center of this case, since most stories treat him as a footnote, and move on. Hew Cargill McCowan was the son of a baronet. That single fact tells you he did not come from the same London as Ronnie and Reggie Kray. The twins were raised in the crowded streets around Bethnal Green, in a world where a boy who could fight earned his standing, and a boy who could not had to buy protection one way or another. McCowan came from money and from a name. He had social position. What he did not have was any feel for the rules that govern Soho after dark. He stepped into clubland believing that ownership meant control. He had bought the lease. He had paid for the refit. The license carried his name. In a normal business, that settles the question of who is in charge. Soho ran on a different system. Control there did not come from a deed or a bank loan. It came from who stood at the door, who watched the till, who answered a particular phone call, and who could make trouble vanish or appear. A man could own every stick of furniture in a club and still not own the club if other people decided who walked through the entrance. McCowan's mistake was not opening a venue. His mistake was opening the right kind of venue in the wrong year. The Hideaway was not a backstreet drinking den hidden from view. It sat on Gerrard Street, in the nighttime centre of the West End, with late trade, a reputation to build, and the chance of pulling in money and faces from across London. For two East End gangsters trying to climb, a room like that was worth more than its takings. It was an address, a way of being seen somewhere better than the streets that made them. The dispute that followed has two versions, and the gap between them is the whole story in miniature. In one version, McCowan, knowing the twins wanted a way into the West End, offered them a slice of the club himself, around 20% of the venture, by several reports. Then he thought better of it and pulled out in public, which was close to an insult. In the other version, the offer ran the opposite way. The Krays approached him and proposed to supply 2 doormen for the club in return for a cut of the takings. A friendly arrangement, on the surface. Security for a percentage. Look closely at that second version, since it explains how the whole racket worked without anyone ever having to say the ugly word out loud. A club needs men on the door. It needs people who can handle drunks, settle fights, turn away trouble, and keep the license clean. That requirement is real, and it gave the firm a clean way in. They did not need to announce a takeover. They offered a service. Once their men stood on the entrance, the firm decided who came in and who waited outside. Once they decided who came in, they shaped the atmosphere of the room. Once they shaped the atmosphere, they shaped the business. An owner could lose his club a fortnight at a time, never having signed a thing away on day one. The percentage for the doorman was rent on his own front door. McCowan refused the arrangement in whichever direction it had first run. And the demand started. The charge that the police eventually brought was demanding money with menaces. That phrase matters in law. It is not a payment dispute or a business disagreement. It means money sought through fear. It means a threat sitting behind a request so that the man being asked understands what happens if he says no. McCowan understood. He went to the police, which in early 1965 was a serious thing to do against the Kray name. People did not do it lightly. The fear around the twins did half their work for them before a hand was ever raised. To grasp why one small club mattered so much to two men who already had a reputation across London, you have to understand that the Hideaway was not the Krays' first move into the West End. It was their second attempt, and the first one had already burned out in a way that most of the screen retellings never mention. That first attempt was a gambling club in Knightsbridge called Esmeralda's Barn. Esmeralda's Barn stood on Wilton Place, a short, smart street running off Knightsbridge, a few minutes' walk from Harrods and from Buckingham Palace. It had opened in February 1955 as a members' theatre club, conceived and owned by a woman named Esme Noel Smith, with murals on the walls painted by the society artist Pietro Annigoni. The name was a play on hers. By the late 50s, it had passed to a man called Stéphane de Fay. Then the law changed, and the change handed the British underworld a gift it had not earned. The Betting and Gaming Act of 1960 legalised gambling in Britain from 1961. The aim of the law was to clean the business up, to drag betting out of the back rooms and the illegal spielers and into licensed, regulated premises that the authorities could watch. The biographer John Pearson made the sharp observation about what happened next. The act, meant to push criminals out of gambling, instead gave them a legal door to walk through. Men who had run illegal games for years could now run licensed casinos and call themselves businessmen. De Fay took advantage of it and turned Esmeralda's Barn from a theatre club into a gaming club. The way the Krays got hold of it ran through one of the most notorious names in post-war London property, Peter Rackman. Rackman was a slum landlord operating across West London, around Notting Hill and Paddington. He bought up rundown houses, packed them with tenants who had nowhere else to go, drove out those protected by old rent controls, and replaced them with people he could charge far more, and use heavy men to do the driving out. His name became a byword for that kind of exploitation. He had money pouring in. And Ronnie Kray noticed. Ronnie wanted a share of what Rackman was making. He sent word. Then he and his associates went to see Rackman in Soho and pressed him. They came away with a cheque. The cheque bounced. When Ronnie went looking to collect, Rackman had made himself hard to find. Rackman understood the trap he was in. If he started paying the Krays for protection, they would never stop. They would bleed him for as long as he kept earning. He needed to settle the matter once, permanently, and get them off his back. So he pointed them at something bigger than a monthly payment. He let them know about a legitimate gaming club whose owner, he judged, could be frightened into selling. That club was Esmeralda's Barn. Charlie Kray, the older brother, later told it differently, claiming he had negotiated a proper purchase for £2,000, with no Rackman involved at all. The versions conflict. What is not in dispute is that by 1960 the Kray firm controlled a licensed gambling club in one of the richest postcodes in London, and very little real money had changed hands to get it. Charlie Kray described what they had landed in a phrase that says everything about how the firm saw the West End. He called it a barn of gold, a license to print money. For a while it was. A high-end gaming club in Knightsbridge pulled in a different class of customer and a different class of cash. The clientele included titled names. Lord Effingham came a couple of times a week and mixed with the guests. The firm, with the casual contempt they showed for the people they used, called him Effingham. Downstairs, there was a cellar club run by a woman named Jeanette, with a resident singer, Cy Grant, and other performers passing through. A former boxer named William Ives worked the door in the Kray years, a man who, by the time he died, was reported to be one of the richest people in Britain. The whole operation looked, from the outside, like exactly the respectable success the twins were chasing. It did not last. By 1963, Esmeralda's Barn was finished as a Kray concern. The reasons are worth setting out, since they explain why the firm was back hunting for a West End foothold barely a year later at the Hideaway. A casino only works if the house keeps its discipline. The Krays did not. Ronnie in particular treated the club's money as his own, ran up losses at his own tables, extended credit to friends that was never going to come back, and lost interest in the careful management a gaming house needs. Their attention was pulled in too many directions as the firm's wider business grew. The takings that had looked like a barn of gold drained away. Peter Rackman, the man who had handed them the club to save his own skin, did not live to see the end of it. He died of a heart attack in November 1962. So by the time Hew McCowan reopened his little room on Gerrard Street, the Krays had already had their Grand West End club and lost it through their own greed and chaos. That history sat behind the Hideaway demand like a shadow. The twins were not approaching clubland as newcomers testing the water. They were men who had tasted the West End, blown it, and wanted back in. A fresh club, run by a soft target with a good name and no underworld protection, was exactly the way back. McCowan did not know he was standing in for a casino the firm had already burned through. He only knew that two brothers wanted a piece of his business and would not take no for an answer. To understand what the Krays actually wanted from a club like the Hideaway, you have to stop thinking about protection money as the main prize. The cash skimmed from one Soho club was small change against the way the firm really made its money in these years, and the man who built that machine was Leslie Payne. Payne was not from the East End. He was born in Paddington in 1924, served in the army during the war, saw action in Italy, and came out as a sergeant, though he later inflated that to major when it suited him. He sold vacuum cleaners and radios, then ran a car dealership in Stratford. In 1959, a dispute over a hire purchase agreement brought him into contact with Ronnie and Reggie Kray. They were not impressed by his fists. They were impressed by his head for business. They took him on, and Payne became the firm's manager, its planner, the man who turned a gang of frightening street criminals into something that could move money through bank accounts and company books. His central contribution was a fraud the firm ran again and again called the Long Firm. The mechanics are simple and they are worth laying out, since they reveal exactly how the Krays thought about legitimate businesses like McCowan's Club. The firm would use a frontman they controlled and set up a company. Real premises, a real bank account, real lines of credit with suppliers. For weeks or months, that company would trade honestly. It would place modest orders, pay every bill on time, do its banking by the book, and build a clean reputation with its suppliers and its bank. The whole point of that patience was to earn trust. Then, at the chosen moment, the front company would place huge orders with the suppliers who now trusted it. Confident in the company's record, the suppliers delivered the goods on credit. The goods were sold off fast, often in a single frantic day, at knockdown prices for cash. Then the company vanished. The premises emptied, the front man disappeared, and the suppliers were left holding worthless invoices for stock that had already been turned into untraceable banknotes. Charlie Kray reckoned each Long Firm could clear around £20,000. In the money of the day, that was a fortune, and far more than the firm could squeeze out of a single nightclub door in a year. Fraud beat violence for return. It also beat it for safety. Fraud investigation was slow and under-resourced, and by the time the police pieced together what had happened, the trail had gone cold and the front company was a memory. The Kray name handled the rest. Anyone who had served as a front kept their mouth shut, because the alternative was worse than any prison sentence. Now hold that picture next to the Hideaway. A legitimate, cash-heavy club with a respectable owner and a clean license was not just a source of skimmed protection payments. It was a potential front, a clean channel for cash, a respectable face to put on the firm's money. A club owner with a baronet's name attached to it was worth even more, since respectability was the one thing money could not directly buy, and the twins wanted it badly. McCowan represented all of that. His refusal did not just cost the firm a percentage of his takings, it blocked their route into a world they were desperate to enter on their own terms. There is a final thing about Payne that matters for the way this whole saga ended, so keep it in mind. He was the brain, but he had limits. He did not want to get involved in the firm's most dangerous schemes, including a plan to smuggle stolen American bonds for the mafia. His reluctance, and the twins' growing volatility, pushed him to the edge of the firm. Ronnie later wanted him dead, and an attempt was made on his life. Payne survived. And when the police finally built a case that could put the twins away for good, it was Leslie Payne, the man who had built their business empire, who walked into a London hotel room and talked for days, handing the detectives the map of everything. The brain that built the firm became the brain that broke it. That comes later. For now, just register that the man pressing McCowan was thinking like a businessman who saw a club as an asset, not just like a bully who wanted an envelope of cash. The Krays had a cover story for the McCowan demand, and it is one of the strangest threads in the whole affair. They claimed they had never been extorting him at all. They said they had been inviting him to invest. The investment in question was a scheme to build a new town in Nigeria, near a place called Enugu. This was not invented out of thin air for the trial. The Enugu project was real, in the sense that the Krays were genuinely mixed up in it. Ronnie had fallen in with Ernest Shinwell, son of the well-known Labour politician Manny Shinwell. The younger Shinwell was trying to raise finance for a development near Enugu, in eastern Nigeria. There was interest from the Nigerian side. Architects and contractors had reportedly committed. The one thing the scheme could not do was raise the money to actually fund itself. The Krays were flown out to Nigeria, and Ronnie was given a reception that would have suited a visiting head of state. 3 days of being wined, dined and treated as an important man, a long way from a gangster who had grown up around Valance Road. He came back full of it. Leslie Payne, true to form, set about building the financial machinery in London, holding companies that would act as the vehicle for raising the funds. None of it held together. The project was unworkable from the start. When Payne went out to Nigeria to set up contacts, he was detained there, and when a contractor demanded money that had been promised and never paid, the whole thing fell apart. That is the scheme the twins pointed to when they said McCowan was being asked to put money into a venture, not threatened into handing over protection. On their telling, he was a potential investor in a grand overseas development who had got cold feet, and the police had turned a business falling out into a criminal charge. It is worth sitting with how clever and how dirty that defense was. The line between investment and extortion can be blurred on purpose, and the Krays were experts at blurring it. A gangster who turns up demanding cash for nothing is easy to convict, if the witness holds. A gangster who can wave a real overseas business project, with real politicians' sons and real architects attached, and say he was merely offering a man the chance to come in on the ground floor, is a far harder target. The Imugu scheme gave the firm a respectable-sounding story to hang over the threats. Whether McCowan had ever been a willing investor, or had simply been frightened into a position where refusal looked like a broken business deal, the effect was the same. It muddied the water around the one thing the prosecution needed to be clean, which was the difference between a request and a threat. The Imugu project also tells you something about the scale of the twins' ambition in this period. They were not content to be feared in the East End, or to run a Soho door. Ronnie was flying to Africa to be treated like a statesman. They were chasing legitimacy on an international scale, with Payne drawing up company structures to match. Against that backdrop, a baronet's son refusing to play along in a Gerrard Street club was not a small irritation. It was a man saying no to the whole performance the Krays were trying to put on, the performance of having become respectable men of business. That refusal had to be answered, or the performance fell apart. There is one more piece of context without which the Hideaway case makes no sense, and it has nothing directly to do with clubs at all. It is the reason Ronnie Kray, on being arrested, spat that the whole thing was down to a newspaper. To understand the trial, you have to understand the scandal that had blown up the previous summer, and the political nerves it left raw. In July 1964, the Sunday Mirror ran a story about an alleged relationship between a leading peer and a London gangster. It did not at first name them. The peer was Lord Boothby, a conservative figure and a well-known public face. The gangster, by clear implication, was Ronnie Kray. At a time when homosexual acts between men was still a crime in England, an allegation of that kind against a peer was explosive. The Krays did not sit quietly. They moved hard against the story. Boothby, for his part, denied everything, wrote a furious public letter, and sued. The newspaper, faced with the libel risk and unable or unwilling to stand the story up in court, collapsed. It paid Boothby £40,000 in damages, a huge sum, printed an apology, and its editor lost his job. On paper, it was a total humiliation for the press and a total vindication for Boothby. Underneath, it was something murkier. The establishment had closed ranks around a peer, the press had been beaten into silence, and a gangster had watched a major newspaper forced to its knees over a story that touched him. The effect of all this on the Hideaway case was poisonous in two directions. For the police and the prosecution, the Boothby affair was a warning. The Krays had connections that reached into Parliament, and into the kind of social circles that could make a libel action land like a hammer. Going after them was not a clean fight against two East End villains. It was a fight against men with friends in high places, and against a recent fresh memory of what happened to people who put the Kray name into print and could not make it stick. For the Krays, the affair fed their belief that they were untouchable, and that any move against them was a vendetta. When the twins were arrested over the Hideaway in January 1965, Ronnie's reaction, as reported, was not fear but grievance. He complained that the police had been after them for long enough, and that the whole thing was down to the Mirror. In his mind, the menace's charge was payback by an establishment embarrassed by the Boothby business, dressed up as a protection racket case. And then the affair reached directly into the legal process in a way that is almost hard to believe. While the twins sat on remand, having been refused bail, Lord Boothby himself stood up in the House of Lords and raised their treatment, questioning whether men should be held without bail in the way they were being held. A peer of the realm, in the Parliament, intervening over the detention of two gangland brothers, awaiting trial for extortion. It is difficult to imagine a clearer sign of how far the Krays' reach extended, and of why the prosecution that followed was always going to be fought on uneven ground. So the case did not begin as a straightforward matter of evidence against two defendants. It began inside a cloud of political embarrassment, press fear, and establishment nerves, with one side convinced it was the victim of a campaign, and the other, wary of the powerful friends ranged against it. McCowan's word was about to be tested in that climate. The arrest itself came in the first week of January 1965. The twins were picked up at the Glenray Hotel on the Seven Sisters Road in North London, where they were listed, with the firm's usual taste for a respectable veneer, as company directors. On 7 January, they appeared at Alder Street and were remanded in custody on the menaces charge. They were taken to Brixton. Then came a detail that tells you how seriously the authorities, at least at this stage, were taking the case and how badly the twins wanted out. Bail was refused. The Krays offered sureties reported at £18,000, an enormous figure for the time, the kind of money that ordinarily smooths the path to release for men with no convictions for violence on the immediate charge. The court still said no. They stayed inside. By the time the matter came near trial, they had spent more than 5 weeks behind a prison wall. For a moment, that refusal looked like the system working. The twins liked to be seen as nightclub owners and men about town, photographed with performers, treated as characters who had made good. Being held in Brixton, denied bail despite a fortune offered in sureties, stripped that image back to something colder. They were defendants on a protection charge, sitting where any other accused man would sit, with their freedom in the hands of a court. The firm's reputation for being above the law took a public dent, but remand is not conviction, and the real contest was always going to be the trial. That is where the Krays were strongest, not in law, where the facts were against them, but in everything that surrounded the law. The fear, the money, the friends, the willingness of people to forget what they had seen. A gangland trial is never decided only by what is said in front of the judge. It is shaped by everything that happens to the witnesses and the jury before they ever reach the courtroom. And in the case of the Hideaway, a great deal happened. The case came to the Old Bailey in March 1965, with a third man in the dock alongside the twins. Edward Smith, known in the firm as Mad Teddy Smith, was charged with conspiring with the Krays to demand money with menaces from McCowan. Smith is a figure worth marking, since he vanished in 1968 and was never seen again. One of the bodies the firm is widely believed to have disposed of, though nothing was ever proven. At the time of the Hideaway trial, he was simply a co-accused. What happened during those proceedings was less a clean legal contest than a demonstration of how the firm fought a case from the shadows. The first line of attack was on McCowan himself. The Krays tried to buy him off before he could finish giving evidence, working through a man known only as Johnny, who approached the club owner. McCowan did not take the bribe. The attempt failed. The second line of attack was on the jury. The firm tried to have the jury dismissed on the grounds that they looked, in the twins' assessment, too intelligent. It is a small, almost comic detail, but it points at something deadly serious. The Krays understood that their best hope lay not in disproving McCowan's account, but in shaping who would judge it. A jury that could be reached, frightened or confused, served them far better than one that would simply weigh the evidence. That attempt to dismiss the panel also failed. After extensive interference, according to several reports, 12 jurors could not reach a verdict in a case that, on the surface, had a willing complainant and a clear charge. A failure to agree meant a retrial. And the second trial is where the prosecution's central weakness was exposed for everyone to see. The case rested on one man. Hew McCowan was, in effect, the sole witness for the prosecution on the heart of the charge. Everything turned on the jury believing his account of the threats over the word of 3 defendants and the doubt their defense could throw up. A single witness case is fragile at the best of times. Against the Kray firm, with its money, its reach and the Enigu investment story, ready to muddy the waters, it was close to hopeless, especially once the firm's people had gone to work on McCowan's credibility. In the second trial, the Judge Mr Justice Lyell intervened on the basis that McCowan stood alone as the prosecution's witness. With the case resting entirely on one man whose reliability had been picked at from every angle, the proceedings could not safely continue. The jury indicated they did not wish the case to go on. On around the 5th of April 1965, Ronnie Kray, Reggie Kray and Edward Smith were found not guilty and discharged. The men walked out of the Old Bailey free, after more than 5 weeks on remand and 2 trials, and the way they walked out mattered as much as the verdict. A failed prosecution does not simply return a defendant to where he started. In ordinary life, a man cleared of a charge goes back to his routine. In gangland, an acquittal against the odds is a promotion. It is proof, broadcast to everyone watching, that the firm can survive the full weight of the state and come out smiling. Think about what the streets of Soho in the East End took from the Hideaway result. A respectable club owner with a baronet's name and the law on his side had spoken against the Krays. The police had arrested them, refused them bail, held them for weeks, and put them on trial twice. And the twins had walked. To a nervous publican, a frightened doorman, a small businessman, wondering whether to pay or refuse, the lesson was brutal and simple. You could do everything right. You could go to the police, give a statement, stand up in court, and the men you accused could still come back, free, and take what they wanted, anyway. That is the real protection racket, and it is a thing made of more than threats. It is the knowledge of what comes after refusal. The fear that the case will fail and you will be left living in the same city as the men you crossed, with their reputation now larger than before. McCowan had walked into exactly that. For Nipper Reed, the detective who would eventually bring the twins down, the Hideaway case was a hard education. Reed had been posted to Lehman Street in the East End in 1964 and tasked with looking into the Krays. He came to understand through cases like this, one, that the firm could not be beaten by touching the edge of its world. A single witness, however brave, was not enough. The fear surrounding the twins would crack a lone complainant, nobble a jury, or simply outlast a prosecution that depended on one man's nerve. To beat the Krays, the police would have to do something far harder. They would have to surround them, find many witnesses, build a case with so many strands that frightening or buying one of them could not bring the whole thing down, and break the wall of silence piece by piece, rather than hoping a single brick would hold. Reed learned that lesson at the Hideaway and applied it years later, when the case that finally worked was built not on one frightened club owner, but on a crowd of people the firm had wronged, including at its centre, Leslie Payne, the business brain who knew where everything was buried. The contrast is the whole point. In 1965, the prosecution rested on McCowan alone and collapsed. In 1969, it rested on so many that no amount of money or menace could topple it. But that was 4 years and at least 2 murders away. In the spring of 1965, the immediate result of the Hideaway case was that the Krays were free, stronger in reputation than before, and ready to take the very club that had been used to charge them. The takeover, when it came, had a cold neatness to it. The Hideaway did not return to being McCowan's quiet success. The club passed into Kray hands. The sale was arranged through the building's landlord rather than through McCowan himself, which is its own small cruelty. The man who had refused to sell the twins a share of his venture did not even get to be the one who handed it over. The freeholder did it for him. The twins renamed the club El Morocco, a name with a touch of the exotic and the fashionable, made for photographs rather than for the worn old room that had traded as Bonsoir a year earlier. On the 5th of April 1965, the same period in which they were cleared, the Krays threw a party at the club to celebrate. El Morocco became almost overnight a fixture of the image they were selling. The guest lists carried names from the world of entertainment: the actress Adrienne Corey, the actor Edmund Purdom, Barbara Windsor, soon to be one of the most recognizable faces in British film and television. The twins stood among them, well-dressed, smiling, hosts rather than defendants, in the very room that had nearly sent them to prison. The press did its part in the same period. In November 1965, the society magazine Tatler ran a glossy profile that called the Kray brothers an East End legend and reached for a comparison with the American outlaws Frank and Jesse James. The photographer David Bailey, one of the defining image makers of 60s London, took portraits of them that helped fix the twins in the public mind as figures of dangerous glamour rather than men who frightened club owners for money. This was the alchemy the Krays performed better than almost anyone. They took an ugly thing, a charge of extortion, an acquittal won through fixed juries, and a bought-off attempt at a witness, and they buried it under camera flashes and famous faces until the public remembered the party and forgot the threats. For McCowan, El Morocco was the final humiliation. The story the public would carry forward was not his, it was theirs. Most people who came to know the room knew it as a Kray club, a stylish corner of swinging London, the place where the twins posed with Barbara Windsor. Far fewer knew it had started as one man's business, that he had refused the firm, gone to the police, and watched the case fall apart and the club change hands. He became background to a legend built on the very episode in which he had stood up. That is how organized crime rewrites memory. The criminals become the faces, the people they pressed become entries in old court files. It is worth being honest about McCowan, since the temptation in a story like this is to turn him into a hero, and there is not enough to do that cleanly. He was not a campaigner against the underworld. He was a man with money and a name, who bought a club, got entangled with people far more dangerous than he understood, and tried to extract himself through the law. His credibility was attacked in court, and the case fell partly on the weakness of relying on him alone. He does not need to be sainted to matter. What he did was rarer than heroism. He said no, in public, to the Kray firm, and put his name to it, when most men would have paid and stayed quiet. The fact that it did not work is not a mark against him. It is a mark against a system that could not finish what his courage started. The room where all this happened was not an accident of geography, and Gerrard Street deserves a closer look, since the street itself shaped the story. By the mid-60s, Soho was 2 places at once, layered on top of each other on the same pavements. By day it was theatres, restaurants, workers, moving through narrow streets, ordinary West End trade. By night, it became something else. The lights came up, the clubs opened, men appeared in doorways, touts watched the crowds, gambling ran in upstairs rooms, and a great deal of cash moved through hands that wrote very little down. That night, economy was the real prize. It threw off money fast, and fear could hide inside the ordinary business of door security, late licenses, and who got a good table. Gerrard Street sat in the middle of it. The street was already changing in a direction that has nothing to do with the Krays, and everything to do with the London we know now. Chinese restaurants had been opening along it. Around the time the Kray party filled El Morocco, the Lun Fung supermarket had opened nearby, in a former tailor's building. The guests sipping drinks in a gangster's new club were sitting in a street that was quietly becoming the centre of London's Chinatown, a transformation that would outlast the Twins, the club, and the whole world of 60s Soho clubland. For an owner, the single most valuable thing in a club like this was the front door. The door decided the money. It decided who got in and who waited outside, who felt honoured and who felt insulted, which crowd the room drew and which it turned away. Control the door, and you controlled the club's character, its reputation, and its takings. Lose control of the door, and you owned the lease, but nothing that mattered. This is the simple mechanical fact that made door work the perfect route for a protection racket. The firm did not have to seize a club, it only had to put its men on the entrance, and the rest followed. Soho was never empty territory waiting for the Krays to claim it, which is part of why their West End ambitions were so fraught. The area had its own operators, its own club owners, its own arrangements with corrupt officers, its own established interests in vice and gambling that stretched back years. The Twins were East End men trying to force their way into a part of London that already had its guardians. Every move risked upsetting an existing earner, drawing the attention of rivals, or pulling in police who had their own quiet stakes in how Soho ran. A new club was never just a new club. It was a piece on a crowded board. That crowded board is why the Hideaway case rippled the way it did. The empty table on opening night, the demand, the arrest, the failed trial, the renamed club, none of it stayed private. In a world that ran on whispers between waiters, drivers, doormen and bar staff, the story moved through Soho long before it reached a newspaper, and each turn of it taught the street the same dangerous lesson about who really held power on Gerrard Street after dark. The Krays did not stop at the West End or at the smiling photographs. The same hunger that drove them into clubland, the need to be seen, to be feared, and to be treated as bigger than ordinary criminals, was the thing that finally destroyed them. The Hideaway was a rehearsal for the pattern, not its end. Within a year of the El Morocco party, the violence the glamour was supposed to hide broke out in the open. On the 9th of March, 1966, Ronnie Kray walked into the Blind Beggar pub in Whitechapel and shot George Cornell dead. Cornell was associated with the Richardson gang, the South London brothers Charlie and Eddie Richardson, whose firm had become the Krays' main rivals and who were known, through the violence attributed to them, by an ugly nickname tied to torture. A killing in a public bar, in front of witnesses, was a different order of thing from a fixed jury in a menaces case. It could not be smoothed over with a Tatler profile. The following year, the firm killed again. In October 1967, Jack McVitie, a minor criminal known as Jack the Hat, was murdered by Reggie Kray at a flat in Stoke Newington after being lured there. Where the Cornell shooting had been Ronnie's, the McVitie killing tied Reggie directly to a murder. The two deaths gave the police something the Hideaway could never offer: bodies, scenes, and a widening circle of people who had been present, who had helped clean up, or who had simply heard too much. By 1968, the net that Nipper Reid had learned to build was closing. On the 8th of May 1968, the Twins were arrested along with members of the firm. This time, the case did not rest on one frightened man. Reid had spent the intervening years doing exactly what the Hideaway had taught him. He gathered witnesses, protected them, and stacked strand upon strand until the structure was too heavy for fear or money to knock down. Leslie Payne, the business brain who had built the firm's empire and then found himself marked for death by the men he served, was among those who turned. The map he and others provided led straight to the murders. In March 1969, the Krays were convicted. They were sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation that they serve no fewer than 30 years, among the longest sentences ever passed at the Old Bailey for murder. The performance was over. The clubs, the famous friends, the glossy photographs and the East End legend had carried them for a decade, and none of it saved them. Their ends were quiet and grim. Ronnie Kray, his mental illness long untreated and finally acknowledged, was moved to Broadmoor, the high-security psychiatric hospital. He died there in March 1995. Reggie served decades in the ordinary prison system. He was released on compassionate grounds in August 2000, dying of cancer, and was dead within weeks in October of the same year. Edward Smith, the co-accused from the Hideaway trial, had vanished back in 1968 and was never found. His fate, one of the many loose threads the firm left behind. The thread that runs from the Hideaway to Broadmoor is the thread of visibility. The twins could not bear to be unseen. A quieter operation, content with its long firms and its skimmed takings, might have lasted far longer in the shadows. The Krays wanted the opposite. They wanted Tatler and David Bailey, the party at El Morocco, the table at the Smart Club, the name on every tongue. That appetite was their engine, and their undoing. It pulled them into the West End, into the clash with McCowan, into the open violence that gave the police something to work with at last. The Hideaway showed the shape of it early. A business they wanted, a man who resisted, a case that failed, and a hunger for status that would not let them stop short of the thing that finally finished them. So what became of the pieces of this story, and why does a small club on Gerrard Street still earn the telling? The street moved on, as streets do. El Morocco did not survive as a London institution. The Kray world of 60s Soho clubland faded, the doors changed, the names over them changed, and Gerrard Street became the busy heart of Chinatown that draws people today for food and festivals. And photographs, most of them with no idea that the firm once threw a party in a club along the same pavement. The room absorbed its history and covered it with new signs and new crowds, which is the ordinary fate of places where ugly things happened a long time ago. Hew McCowan faded faster than the street. He is the reason the story exists, and he is the part of it the public forgot first. The criminals kept their fame. The man who refused them became a name in old reports, recoverable only by people willing to dig past the glamour shots. There is a hard truth in that. Standing up to organized crime does not guarantee a clean ending, or even a remembered one. Sometimes it guarantees the opposite. The brave act gets buried under the legend of the men you defied. The pattern McCowan ran into, though, has not aged at all, which is the real reason the Hideaway is worth more than a footnote. Organized crime does not always arrive with violence at the front. Often, it arrives with an offer. A few men for the door. A percentage in exchange for security. A chance to invest in something bigger. A friendly arrangement that a sensible owner would be foolish to refuse. The firm understood that legitimate businesses, especially ones flush with cash and short on protection, were doorways into a respectable world that money alone could not open. Nightlife, gambling, property, any trade where cash moves fast and fear can hide behind a service. The Krays were chasing all of it, through Esmeralda's barn, through the long firms Leslie Payne ran, through the Enugu scheme and through the door of one small club on Gerrard Street. The Hideaway shows that pattern more clearly than any of the bloodier chapters because it has no body and no shootout to distract from the machinery. There is only a man, a club, a demand dressed as an offer, a refusal, a failed prosecution, and a takeover. Strip away the celebrity faces at El Morocco, and what remains is a working diagram of how violent men move into legitimate space. They find the soft target, they make the offer, they wait, and when the offer is refused, they apply pressure until the law either stops them, or, as in McCowan's case, tries and fails. The case should have been a turning point. A complainant willing to talk. A clear charge, a firm court reaching into the West End. Instead, it became part of the myth. Another acquittal the twins could wear like a medal. It taught the Krays that their name could carry them through a courtroom. It taught the police, in Nipper Reid at least, that the name was exactly the thing that had to be broken, and that one brave man would never be enough to break it. Both lessons came due 4 years later, in the same building where the Hideaway case fell apart, when a crowd of witnesses finished what a single witness could not. That leaves the question the empty table posed on a December night in 1964, before any of it had happened. When the Kray firm came for your business, dressed it up as a partnership, and would not take no for an answer, what did saying no actually cost? For Hew McCowan, the answer was not a beating or a headline death. It was slower and more humiliating than that. He kept his life and lost his club, his case, and his place in the story. He said no, did everything the law asked of him, and watched the men he accused walk free and take the very thing he had refused to give them. The cost of refusing the Krays, in his case, was not paid in a single violent night. It was paid in the long, quiet erasure that followed, in a city that remembered the party and forgot the man who never wanted it thrown.